And we are live with Sharif El-Mekkia, back for another Freedom Friday. Good morning, brother. How you doing?
Good morning. Good morning. Excited about this show. And yeah, Freedom Fridays it is. Excited to be here.
I think we get so much love from our friends about these shows, about the Friday shows, doing a Freedom Friday every week. Feels like it's a little bit of a sauna for people to exercise their weekly microaggressions and bring them here and kind of, sweat them out, wash them out, get rid of your week's worth of microaggressions. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about the Black Bourgeoisie. Why are we talking about this? We're talking about it because it has come up in several shows that we have done. We have talked about the history of Black education right after the Civil War and after slavery. We have talked a little bit about Brown versus Board. We've talked a little bit about the Black independent school movement. And now here we are. In each of those discussions, we talked about the Black bourgeoisie playing a role in the lack of educational progress through each of those things. So that's where we are today. We said in each of those shows we should talk about it. And that's what we're doing today. So El-Mekkia, brother, where do you think we start when we talk about the Black bourgeoisie?
Well, I mean, I think, in one level, I think you have to start talking about it the way Malcolm described the genesis of it, with the field Negro and the house Negro, where one group and again, when sometimes people misunderstand and think that everybody who was in the house was anti-Black or anti their brother, when that wasn't the case for all of them. There were some who recognized that we're all in this together. I'm listening to, I'm the spook who sat by the door. I'm inside. They're talking freely. The white plantation owner is talking freely, and I'm taking this information and I'm feeding. Oh, so-and-so, they're going to try to sell y'all next weekend. Let me get you that information. Hey, so-and-so, here's a little bit of food. I know they, said you couldn't eat this evening because you didn't work hard enough here. Let me get you some food. So you had some of like that. Then you had others who said, oh, I made it. I'm here. And forget y'all. And matter of fact, I'm going to protect this house with my life against all the rest of y'all. And so I think that's where it kind of started, and then just continued, to the iterations that we have today.
And you have this quote that you talked about each time this comes up. You have this quote about the Black bourgeoisie's position within white supremacy. What's that quote?
So the quote is, there are some Black people who don't want to end white supremacy. They just want to improve their position within it. So they don't want to end it. They just want to say, like, hey, I can figure out how to live and survive as an individual. I'm not concerned about deconstructing this as a whole. And so
part of that is because they're invested in it. They're invested in it, right?
Exactly. They see some individualized benefit of tokenism, of this attention, singular attention, and less concern about the masses.
So they are getting position within the systems that we are often confronting. One of those systems is the educational system. Within the educational system, we know that the Black college educated, the Black elite, and the Black lower elite and upper middle class, and the Black middle class are deeply invested in the educational system. One, for no other reason, is because it is one of the systems of which they have been able to find work. When you are college educated and Black throughout history in the United States, education and social services become two places where you can actually do work. So it's no rip on them for being invested, because they became stakeholders within the system as workers. But there's a mindset, right? So you can infiltrate a system, doesn't mean you have to become it. What do you think about the mindset of being able to still be Black, middle class, college educated, working within the system, but you're still conscious? I mean, do you think there's something to that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that not only is that possible, it's a necessity, but I think that takes a level of humility and constant interrogation, and make sure that you're not ingesting the smog of anti-Blackness, right? Like, so it's a conscious effort to say, like, I know this room is filled with smoke, and it's secondhand smoke is just as deadly, secondhand anti-blackness is just as deadly.
Woo.
Right. And so we have to have that kind of, that mindset. If you don't have that smoke detector in your head built into your consciousness, you're going to get sucked in. At some point, you're going to be like, yeah, you know what? There is something wrong with that other group. Oh, yeah, they must not be doing something right. Oh, yeah, they must not be working as hard as I did. And what's scary about that is that whenever you are in those token positions, you best believe it was some activist from 40, 30, 5 years ago who made it possible for them to even crack the door. So for people to have such short memories, I think is extremely problematic. But I do think it is absolutely crucial to have that mindset, and to be able to be in those spaces and still have a consciousness of what are the masses. It's not just me. How are the people feeling?
And Deborah Watkins says a smoke detector is needed. And Nehemiah Frank says secondhand anti-blackness is just as deadly. They understand. Christine Lassner also says secondhand anti-blackness is just as deadly. And when we say smoke, we obviously mean racism, right? And Derek Bell, who I think it should be required reading for everybody, is as part of the long line of Black intellectual thought in the United States. You can't get to where we are today without getting through Derek Bell and his contribution, which has been stolen, reworked, and kind of reframed and redone. Is
I was about to say hijacked a little bit, right?
They hijacked it like totally. It's really weird, but his theory was critical race theory. Critical race theory is based on the idea that racism in the United States is endemic and permanent. It's not going to change. So how would your strategies in life change if you thought that racism was permanent and endemic? It would change your strategies in life, and integrationist strategies probably wouldn't be the ones you would think ever would get you fully capitalized in a capitalist society, right? Like having your own it's the difference between owning a home or renting in some ways. So we have half of our people who are trying to get us to be renters, and we have another half who are trying to get us to be homeowners, and they're fighting. And when I think about those two groups of people, Sharif, I always do this. I always go back to Washington, Booker T. Washington, and Du Bois. They both had something to contribute to this debate that we're having today. And I'm getting away from seeing them as like polar opposites or the Western duality. They are part of a one thing, intellectual Black thought in the United States. So we have to say that. But where people thought that Washington was dangerous because he was preaching industrial education, they don't do the same thing with Du Bois about his idea around the talented 10th, about how cancerous that was for Black thought and Black unity. And he was also selling that, just like Washington is accused of selling industrial education to white people. Du Bois was selling the talented 10th to another group of white people, right? And that's what became the NAACP and got the investment from things like the Garland Fund, which actually invested in the NAACP and then proceeded to have them change their focus from being state violence against Black people, lynching, and things that had direct influence on jobs, the economy, those things. They got them to switch their focus from that to educational integration, which is a very interesting thing. Very few people know that is how the NAACP took on the mantle. They didn't even think it was the thing to be fighting at that point before they got the money from the Garland Fund. People should look that up. And if you want a link, please let me know. I'll send it to you. What do you think, Sharif, about this talented 10th? Because I beat up on it the wrong way. I think sometimes for other people, not for me. I think I'm right. What is how do you make sense of the talented 10th?
Yeah, I think I should start off with saying, 100% about like it's a philosophy that people who internalize it the wrong way, who think about it in the wrong way, it can become cancerous. So much so that even W.B. Du Bois, towards the end, said that he rejects the notion now because, in a quote, I think he described him as hard-hearted. And he was talking about hard-heartedness towards the rest of the people, the 90%. And so what he looked at it was like, you know what, they're not using their skills, their talent, their positions to improve the rest of the community. They're using this for individualistic gain. And so now I'm doing away with this. I'm like, they soiled the water, so to speak, because when he was thinking about it, it was like, okay, how do we get folks 10% into these positions and they collectively help maneuver the rest of us? It ended up being the opposite for too many of them. Another person that I frequently comes up, when we talk about this is Cecil B. Moore. And I'm glad you described the NAACP. He was a Philadelphian. He led the NAACP until they shunned him. One of the books that I've been reading is called Up South, where it talks about the not only the racism, but the Black experience in Philadelphia and the civil rights movement up north, particularly in Philadelphia, and how it wasn't just the Montgomery bus boycott. It wasn't just the marches for civil rights in the South. They're also encapsulated in the North and the movements up north, and it's very informative. But Cecil B. Moore, in there, it describes like the NAACP in this war between the national office and the Philadelphia office, because they looked at the Philadelphia office as too radical, as not wanting to, do things politically. Philadelphia wanted to do things politically. And as you said, fight for segregation, housing. They had the slogan, "Don't buy where you can't work," right? Like they were just saying, like, no, we need to organize differently. And the national movement, kept trying to, get them out of there and do things. But Cecil B. Moore temporarily led Philadelphia's NAACP, and it was at its height of its strength and power. And one of his quotes, and I think is speaks clearly to this, he says, and Michael Cord, one of my heroes here in the city, writes this is in the Tribune for Cecil B. Moore's birthday. "Unfortunately, many Blacks who benefited were selfish." I'm talking about this 10%. "They didn't pass the baton by helping other Blacks. That's precisely why Cecil B. Moore truthfully and frustratingly once said, 'Often when I get a Black man a good job, I make another white man.' In other words, he meant successful Black people far too often begin acting like white people in terms of arrogance and elitism."
Wow.
Yeah. Right. And so that's I think, speaks to the NAACP's position. And this is, you can see why he got kicked out of the position. They did all this maneuvering. They're like, "No, bro, you got to go. You spitting fire. You trying to organize these Black folks. It can't happen. We got to get you out of there."
And this is Philadelphia that you're talking about right now.
Yeah, Philadelphia. Right? Yeah, if people want to, the book is Up South, Civil Rights and Black Power in Philadelphia, written by Matthew Countryman.
So this is interesting. In one of our previous shows, I read this quote, and it's about Philadelphia and the NAACP. And there's a study called the Philadelphia NAACP: Race versus Class Consciousness During the 30s. And by that, it means the 1930s. It's by Viscount Nelson at Dartmouth College. And this is the opening line of the study. "On the reverse side of every NAACP membership card printed during the 1920s and 1930s appeared an inscription outlining the goals of that organization to make the American Negro physically free from lynching and mob violence, mentally free from disenfranchisement, economically free from discrimination on the job. There was, however, an additional goal that the national office in New York and the Philadelphia branch of the NAACP acted to achieve, but omitted from membership cards. Based on evidence of Philadelphia's branch correspondence, this goal might be summarized as to make the Negro middle class socially free from the disrepute of the Black masses."
Yeah.
It's a little bit stunning if you think about like one of the origin stories of the Talented 10th and the origin story of the NAACP is a joint project between educated Negroes and white people with money to elevate a class of Black people to become the leaders, the Talented 10th, the ones who would guide us out of the disrepute of the Black masses, which creates social distance and division within Black folks, which to me is always a sign that something's wrong. It's always a sign of a bad plan. Du Bois, when he argued about the Talented 10th, he was specifically arguing for educating Black teachers, professional men, ministers, and spokesmen who would earn their special privileges by dedicating themselves to leavening the lump and inspiring the masses. And that would achieve full political and civil rights.
Yeah.
That would happen? Is that what happened? We have more educated black people, especially in education, than we have ever had in the history of the United States. So we have more black PhDs than we ever had, more black master's degrees. I know black people with 3 master's degrees and a PhD, right? Have we achieved full political and civil rights through the elevation of a educated black class?
Listen, I think, I think I'm going to be quoting Malcolm a lot during this episode. But, one of the things he said was a college degree doesn't make you educated. Right. And so I think we see that, because education, as Martin Luther King described, should attach, not only the ability to, pursue your dreams, but have this moral consciousness. And so the education that we described is often not really an education. It doesn't advance the causes of the people. And I think when we talk about this individual versus community, when I was a principal, I would always talk about, we lead and serve our communities. That was part of the work that we did. I was told by a white administrator that, he had problems with that because when he grew up in this Tony suburb, no one had ever told him that he owed anything to the community. And that it was just like he had never even heard of such a thing. And, for me, that was the only way that we grew up. I was like, what are you talking about? And so we were 2 different worlds, right? For him to hear that, oh, students, you're not only getting the education for yourself. This means this is part of the community's degree. Like all of this we're all in this together. Your advancement is advancement of your people. Arise, you mighty nation, accomplish what you will, right? Marcus Garvey. It's not individual, it's collective. His whole upbringing, he said his entire community's upbringing was totally different. The only thing, and I told him, I was like, yeah, but y'all unify. But the only thing y'all unify is to keep the doors closed to black and brown people. That's when y'all unify.
Well, and this idea that your degree is communal property, I think, was so strong at one period of time, probably in the period of time when Du Bois was pitching this idea, the talented 10th, the idea that education and educated people, your job in life was racial uplift, was solid. What in this book, The Black Bourgeoisie, which is a classic if you want to study or think about the Black bourgeoisie, in this book, Franklin Frazier talks about what happens once you develop that class of people. They don't necessarily see it as a communal property, their status and their degrees as communal property. And they don't necessarily see their life as being about racial uplift. They start loving the benefits of their status and their position, and they don't want to lose it. What Saul Alinsky would call, you have the haves, the have-nots, but in between those two is the most dangerous group, the have-a-littles and want more. And Saul Alinsky warns us to organize those people because their desire for status is actually going to be one of the biggest detriments to progress. No, Saul Alinsky is not black, but black people draw on everybody's science to try and free ourselves.
Yeah, one of the things that, and you, excuse me, you mentioned is I think it's really instructive when people get a chance, look up the 1959 NAACP branch election in Philadelphia. It says so much about the country. It says so much about the direction, and it says so much about where the NAACP is positioned now in our lives. But as the election approached, and I'm reading this from from the book, there was a column was written, and one of the ways that a political columnist, Dorothy Anderson, described it was that this election is really a battle between the black elite and the little people. Right. And so then they were talking about there's a certain group of black folks that were politically powerful, but there's another group, the power people, who were not interested in getting along, not interested in appeasement, not concerned about their so-called social prestige, but who are concerned with the daily injustices which beset the colored man and women in the city and want to do something about it. If our NAACP will fight for us, we wouldn't have head whippings and suspicious arrests in the numbers we've had. The recent successful membership campaign speaks about the little people who are joining, and it was a mandate from the people. It was a surge in membership to the NAACP prior to this election. And it was a mandate from the people for the local NAACP to become once again a militant daredevil organization fighting across the board for our rights. Ours in capital, capitalized, right? And so it speaks to like two different groups way back in 1959, where they're saying like, nah, this is for us to be able to have a singular position. We need one more position on you know, whether it's a board, whether it's you know, skilled labor, whatever it is. Where the masses were saying, no, our existence is very different. I was disappointed to read NAACP. I'm sorry, the Tribune, Philadelphia Tribune, the oldest Black newspaper, back in 1955, devoted a whole entire issue to Black-owned homes to show white people that, you know, Black pathology wasn't really a thing, because look at us, we have these homes. And so they did an entire issue of a newspaper to portray homes, just to, you know, say, see, Black pathology, that's them. But we're not all juvenile delinquents, unwed mothers, buffoons, and drug addicts. Look at us, right? Like that's what you're rolling in the paper.
So, you know, I would ask people who are listening to this, if you go to YouTube and you search for the Black Bourgeoisie, as I've done multiple times, I thought there had to be like file footage of Franklin Frazier and more discussions about this seminal book and the seminal work. There is almost nothing if you were to just search for the Black Bourgeoisie. But one of the things that does come up relates to your comment. There is file footage, I believe it's from the 1950s, of Black folks in Los Angeles who were middle class and upper middle class, who were really just kind of lamenting the scourge of Negroes moving into Los Angeles at $1,000 a month, $1,600 a month coming up here. These ignorant Negroes from the South coming up here, and they're all genteel and this is the Black, you know, crispy class. They got the money, they got the crisp dollars, and they're having a conversation. The crispy class, yeah, you know, got the crisp dollar bills, and they break and they're tender, just like the Crispies, you know. But so even in the 50s, there was this class of Black folks who had a little, wanted more, they had position and status, and they saw the Black masses as something they had to create distance from, as a way to mark their own status and success, right? And you have to believe that that somehow is part of a plan that has to be bred into a people to make sure that you don't need chains if you can make people like absorb all the wrong worldviews and ideas about themselves. Then you can just set them free, and they'll do their work for you.
Yeah, what's Carter G. Woodson's quote? You know, about they'll build if there is no back door, if they don't have the consciousness, right? Then you don't have to worry about barring them from the front door. They'll go to the back door without you even demanding it. And if there is no back door, they will build one.
That's so deep.
Yo, man, when you think about that, and before the show ends, you know, I'll get the exact quote, because it is so profound, so deep, and speaks to the constricted and oppressed thinking, you know, the internalized oppression, internalized anti-Blackness, you know, what Malcolm say, who taught you to hate yourself? And not only is it, you know, the plantation owner, but eventually there were other people who look like you who's teaching you to hate yourself.
The school board, your teachers, your government, the media, people in journalism. You receive, throughout your lifetime, you receive millions, billions of messages. Some of those messages are explicit, some are implicit. All of those messages taken collectively are anti-Black.
Yeah.
Whether you want to admit it or not, your children are being doused like tea bags in anti-Blackness constantly, and we're not fighting back.
Steeped and seeped, huh?
That's right. Just like tea bags, just black tea bags dropped in, kind of like anti-Blackness antifreeze, and they're absorbing it. And then when they show signs of self-hate or problems from that steeping, you blame it on them.
Yeah.
Or their parents, or their culture, or their background, or their skin color, their melanin, anything else except for the fact that you are dipping them in tea bags in hate. Michelle Johnson says, I'm in my car and had to pull over. You have a lot of meaningless degrees. One of the goals of Americanization is to strip us of collective spirit. which I think is an awesome quote.
Mm-hmm.
Zakia reminds us that Saul Alinsky, who I just brought up minutes ago, is problematic in his own right, which I completely agree with. Nehemiah, what do you say, Nehemiah? Nehemiah says, this is Nehemiah Frank in Oklahoma, who I think actually would be great in this conversation because he's done a lot of focusing on Black Wall Street. And the lost histories of Black Wall Street. Like, not all of our history is about trying to integrate as a means of capital success. But
yeah, that brother out there teaching a lot of
he's
people.
really teaching. And actually, you know, I just saw something last night that was talking about 27 other. National Geographic has a thing on the Black Wall Street, but 27 other communities that were just like it, and they have file footage of some of them, which I just thought was amazing to see.
When they check that out, yeah,
I'll send you a link. He says, even white supremacy seemingly owns the degrees that Black people earn. Black folks have to remain conscious that their degrees are their own and should be used to uplift their families and communities. This is actually interesting to me, because it gets to Black professors, academics, and Black people with bow ties and PhDs in academia, who I always talk about, right? Give them a hard time all the time. But I see them as the remnant of Du Bois's talent and 10th archetype. If I had to point to any group today that are living out and fulfilling his mission, it is our Black academics, right? And in some ways, it's weird, because they're not actually stating that they should create social distance between them and the Black masses. In fact, they're creating something of a phony affection for the Black masses. And they're using their knowledge of Black people as a way to gain status within academia, oftentimes to write unserious papers one after another to each other. Not to the people, super unserious. They're writing. They're not writing for us. They're writing for their friends, and they're writing for status within academia, which is a very white enterprise. And they call it publish or perish, which means you better publish some things often. So they will write about critical race theory and completely botch the concept. They will write about education, but completely make it about how we should join the system rather than get out of it. Right. This is a group I call the Afroplastics, because the Afroplastics are people who take Afrocentrism or Black poverty porn and use it as a ticket to better their status in the dominant system. And the dominant system that I'm talking about is academia, in the tower. And they wear like revolutionary drag in order to gain status use it as a ticket, a Black ticket to kind of acknowledgement from the white establishment. And to your quote earlier, it's not to end or interrogate even the system that's educating them and that they're trying to gain status in. It is to improve their own status.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you think about it, it's so many of them, you know, and I'll talk to the teachers about this too, right? Like, you know, it's not just anti-Blackness, where it's like, you know, oh, I hate you. When it's under the guise of, oh, I'm trying to advance you, but I'm giving you this reasoning, this illogical, rationale, and I'm ignoring the history, right? I'm ignoring not only the current situation, I'm ignoring the history. And so when you're offering positions where it's not aligned to, you know, the masses, I think what they end up continuing to do is promoting things that support individualized success. You know, and they'll point that out to you. Hey, look, see, so and so did this XYZ. I'm like, that's one person in a city with 400,000 Black people. We're talking about where a quarter of them are in poverty, in deep poverty, and you're selling me this story about this one individual and why it worked for them.
And they want to sell you that one individual because that one individual is useful.
Yeah, it's useful to their story. And it may even be it may even be their own story. You know, and I think it's a level of selling out when you do that, you know, to be frank. And when you think about, Marcus Garvey talked about traitors of various races. He's like, traitors of like the white race, they're shunned. You know, they're shunned. They're spoken about as irresponsible individuals, right? Like, and they're pushed to the side, right? But traitors to the Black race, are often amongst the highest place in education and society.
Wow. Wow. Which is probably why they're the last ones to truly interrogate academia that they're trying to get status in. They interrogate everything else, really, because their whole life, their whole intellectual kind of purpose in life is to interrogate things. But it's funny that they exist within academia, which has produced some of the most anti-human ideas, and like eugenics came out of academia, right? Like segregation came out of academia. Slavery and Jim Crow was actually endorsed by academia, right? Like the Tuskegee experiment. All of these things, you can use academia as a weapon in so many ways that you would think that if you were trying to get a PhD in it today within that system, a majority of your interrogation would be of the system that is producing you as a PhD. But it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can survive. Probably you can't survive if you did that in academia.
And that's the point. Would it be different if you were trying to survive because you're like, I need to be here for my people? It's another thing if you're trying to survive, you're like, I need to be here for me. Those are two different frameworks, two different paradigms, and so when your North Star isn't aligned to your people, then you're inevitably going to fight for self. I have no problem with somebody who's like, oh, I'm going to try to be in the system and I am tinkering, drilling holes, undermining because this ship got to go down, as opposed to just we're fine. Throw the others, whatever it is that they can get, and I think you see, you just see that. And then I want to make sure that we're connected. It's not just here in America. As you know, I grew up overseas in Iran, and one of the things that we will read about a lot, a ton, is colonialism and the strategy of not trying to, dominate the entire group or the country by yourself, but to elevate a token or two or a group of tokens to do that work for you. That was this once the Britain decided, in France and all these other racist colonial powers recognized, like, hey, it's more expensive for us to be there. We just need to elevate somebody, right? When America, France, England colluded to get Patrice Lumumba assassinated, it was from his own people because of what he was saying, right? Like, oh no, we're going to nationalize these resources for our people. That's what got him. That's what got him killed. We would read about British colonialism in India, and it was just amazing, like how the folks would be elevated. These brown people would be elevated, and they would oppress more than the oppressor himself, right? Like the oppressor was their best teacher, and it showed how they subjugated an entire nation.
What's interesting about the global perspective is that colonizing as an enterprise internationally first meant that you separate people from their land and then from their resources and then from their leaders and their kings and their religion and their language. And it's a process that happens, like from the very beginning to the end, of separating you from things. The difference between global colonization and what happens in the United States is, in the United States, you had a group of involuntary immigrants, which are Black people, who were brought here, and you didn't have to separate them from their land, their religion, and all that stuff as much as you had to colonize their body and then their mind. So for a period of time, it was all about colonizing the body, restricting your movement, making you do things, making you work for things. But the aftermath, the afterbirth of slavery was mental slavery, which we were told by Bob Marley and Marcus Garvey and everybody else to watch out for, right? I can't think of a greater example of a plantation, a modern form, than academia, because it is producing some of the most controllable thought villains for Black people possible, and they don't even know it in many cases. And let me say this, it's not everybody, because someone's going to say to me, Chris, you're using too much of a broad brush.
Somebody already said it. Ray, calm down, bro. It's not everybody, but if the shoe fits, then in Africa they say when somebody puts on a shoe and they holler, It's them.
Yeah, it's them. Here's the thing: is no, it's not all of them. But if you look at 90% of the thought product that they put out, so much of it is similar, and so much of what they like. On our program, we had more than one person who fits this description, who are writing these super Afrocentric type sounding polemics against education reform. Education reform is just about white saviors. Having independent Black schools is just about Black hucksters. Anything outside of the traditional education system is an attack, and it's villainous because it's seeking to destroy public education as we know it. To believe that idea means that you have to start by thinking this system has ever been good, right? Which tells me where you fall on the line of whether or not you believe that the education system in the United States is good and positive, and that we need to make it good again, like make education great again, versus the mega people, versus the people who have always been clear on this is not our system. It was never built for us. It's a system of social control to reproduce the social classes, mores, values, and whatnot into a people that may not want to participate. That's what schools are about. So there is no idea of Black liberation or freedom that involves you telling your own people that the best way to go is to succumb to the system. Give your children over to it, right? But that is what we're being told, isn't it? I mean, I think if you think about the NAACP moratorium on charter schools, do you see some of this that we're talking about in that dynamic? Major civil rights group, started by white people, by the way, with white money, who are collectively telling you that your best option is to not have options. Your best option is to only have one system and put your kids in it. Do you see that like as being a continuation of everything that we're talking about?
I think absolutely. I mean, particularly when you see that so many of the folks, the leaders of it, did not experience school and education the way that the people who were choosing other options were experiencing. How their children and grandchildren were experiencing education was not the same for the elitists that were leading the NAACP. They were making sure that they were finding other routes for their own individual children.
Good
and so
point.
if you're doing that for your own child, but you're saying this is good for me, not thee, then right there you are, your inner beliefs about your people betray you. And it's not about, and I agree. Anytime we're talking about like a system in this country, the way that it was built, and again, it goes back to history, right? Like, and understanding that every system in this country needs to be interrogated, pushed, challenged, and often dismantled and reimagined, because it was still, the legacy is still loyal to the foundational principles. The legacy of these systems are still loyal to the foundational principles. And so you can say what you want, but as soon as you tell me like, no, that system, no, protest everything else, but not the educational system. Let's just eat around the edges and let's just
kind of
massage it to be better. We can
Isn't
massage
that weird? Because that's like one of the most essential systems, right? Like if you control how people think and how they learn and what they learn and where they learn it and how they learn it, you kind of control everything, don't you?
That's the quickest way to control everything else.
Years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I visited the Whitney plantation in Louisiana, and I thought I knew everything about slavery, that I had read so much and I was so smart. There was so much that I did not know. One of the things is at the Whitney plantation, there's a graveyard, and in that graveyard, it's all of the babies that died. So all of and there was a lot of them because mortality was really high, and in some cases their mothers. But one of the things that our tour guide told us was, you're really thinking about 13 and 14-year-olds. These type of plantations used to pawn for 12 and 13-year-olds so that they could start their baby making ages, but also get them while they're impressionable, them and their offspring at the right point in life, because older enslaved people often cause problems. So they'd want a plantation like that would want to get fresh crops of 12 and 13-year-olds and then groom them and their babies to be slaves, to be enslaved. I had never heard that before, that they were deliberately trying to get our young as a way of keeping us all compliant. that's the education system. I mean, we're handing over 8 million Black children every day to schools that that we have to do some interrogation of, don't we? I mean, am I being too distrustful, Sharif? I know you've worked within the system and outside of the system. I know I sound completely cynical. I mean, do you see some upside to what I'm saying?
I mean, what I can say is that, we spoke about this earlier about the people who are using their positions, they're using positions of authority and influence, which a conscious teacher will use. So those folks who are in there and doing the right thing and using education as liberation, constructing this school to activism pipeline, thinking about, like, as I'm educating, I'm not just educating you. I know that you're going to touch the community. If they're doing it that way, and there are many who are doing it that way, who are thinking about that as they write lesson plans, who are thinking about that as they build relationships and teach content the way content is supposed to be taught. The ones who think like, yeah, no, I am accountable for how much my children learn, right? Like I am accountable for what they're able to produce, what they know, like those kind of things, like, and understand, like, part of education for liberation is content plus inspiration. Like those people, like, yes, they're doing it. And, like, we need more and more of them. There are others who are not thinking that way. There are others who are thinking very, not only individualistic, but they will tell you that, you know what, I got mine, you better get yours, right? There's no more individualistic motto that I've heard from a teacher than that. Like that is the crux of, a broken mindset, self-hatred and hatred for your people. Woo. And we've heard it often. We've all heard that.
And you say it all the time.
And from people who look like us. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we got to be real. Some of our own people. That's what this whole show is about, is the role that our so-called educated people play in the lack of educational progress. We've got a lot of people coming in here. Teachers are like the police. Those spook who sat by the door are not in the system. They do not live in the system. Tanisha People says, we definitely have to impress upon the minds of our young people to grow more revolutionaries. And I think it was Zakia who, in a couple of shows back, got us to take a look at the books around the destruction of Black boys. In that series, there's a book called Kill Them Before They Grow. And it is about killing the revolutionaries before they have time, they have a chance to grow.
Man, that piece, Kill Them Before They Grow, that reminds, and we talked about this before on the 8 Black Hands, that there was a philosophy amongst, rabidly racist white folks that said the best time to hate Black people is before they're born.
Ooh.
The best time to hate them is before they're born. Which means you are thinking about their childhood, while they're in the womb and in their childhood, you're already thinking of how to destroy them. That's an exact quote from this, politician in Louisiana. Right. And so we can't think that was an individual, like just, oh, that's one crazy dude that he was just like, nah, he was speaking for the system. He was speaking for America.
That's depressing, bro.
Yeah.
What's the good news?
The good news is we got revolutionaries in all realms, folks who are fighting the fight, who understand Derek Bell's philosophy, who understand Malcolm X's philosophy, who understand that organization, including schools and children, must be promoted, right? And we have to organize minds. We have to organize people, ideas, and money. And that's, the good news is that fight hasn't stopped. There's we talk about legacy of anti-Blackness. There's also a beautiful, uplifting, healing legacy of pro-Blackness, of pro-community, of pro-children, right? And so that's where I draw my spirit from. Yeah, we can get depressed, but if we're not tapped into the right people, we have to make sure we are tapped into our community and the people who are doing real revolutionary work out in these streets.
A lot of what we've been talking about is history. And I believe that, history is, it's monumentally important, but it's more important if you really tie it to what you're living today. I think history is great as a story, but it's even better as instructive to what you do today. And along those lines, I just want to connect everything we're talking about to what I think is just a small example of
how today is impacted by yesterday. So I'm going to share my screen here. I want to point out for folks that this is a story that I wrote 2 years ago. So in June 2017, I wrote this piece called Charter Schools versus the Privatization of Color People. In this, I'm actually talking about the moratorium, the NAACP moratorium on charter schools. And, I had an origin story because I went out to California when this started, and I saw protesting Black people who were parents of formerly incarcerated kids that had been in the system and treated poorly and whatnot, who were actually in charter schools that they thought were really geared exactly towards their needs and what they wanted. And they came out, and the NAACP was having a hearing. This is what I want. Let me tell you a few things about this hearing. They were having national hearings on charter schools. The one that they had in Los Angeles, they had on Tuesday at 2:00 at LAPD headquarters. Okay. So their engagement of the grassroots Black community of Los Angeles was taking place on a weekday at 2 p.m. at the headquarters of the police department. Inside the police department is where they hosted. Now, I want you to get your mind around that first of all, right? Like as an organizing principle. God bless Shirley, who at the time had a long-term organizer who had worked with Parent Rev in Los Angeles. She was my guide on a lot of things, introduced me to a lot of people, and she has since passed away. But and God bless her. She knew Alice Huffman, the leader of the NAACP, and they talked for a minute outside. And Alice Huffman said to her right in front of me, "Girl, I'm going to pray for you organizing in them neighborhoods you be going in." And Shirley said back to her, "I'll pray for you too." Alice Huffman, the leader of the NAACP, turned in her high heels and her very nice outfit that she was wearing and walked over with the rest of the NAACP members and got into Black Suburbans that looked like Obama and drove off into the night. And Shirley looked at me and said, "Ain't that some shit?" Right there, right? Shirley was an organizer in real communities. NAACP leaders were on some bougie shit, right? Got into their cars. This piece that I wrote is about how their moratorium came to be. And what I want to point out to people first is this is the person who wrote the NAACP moratorium. This is the person responsible for writing it. I don't know if you can notice anything about her that might stick out to you. But this is the person who wrote the language for the NAACP, is supposedly a Black organization, to not deny Black people the access to schools that they obviously wanted in California.
I'm calling her right now.
Roxana Marachi, right? So she wrote the language. Guess who she gave the language to get it passed? She gave it directly to this dude. So this dude, by the way, a private school graduate, took that language and he brought it directly to Alice Huffman, who is the state leader of the NAACP and also a former lobbyist for the Teachers Union of California. And they got it passed in a very undemocratic way. Let's start from, she wrote the language, she gave it to him, and he got it passed through this person back here, Alice Huffman. And it became a national thing from that point. I want to point out to you that both of these people, let's find them here. This is the writer of the NAACP moratorium. This is the passer of it, who got himself a position within the NAACP, weirdly, without any type of election or anything, just got appointed by Alice Huffman to that position. And where are they board members of? They are board members of Diane Ravitch's Network for Public Education. This is getting weird because this really doesn't feel like a Black movement all of a sudden. This story is a little weird. It gets worse because I want people to go and find this. Just Google charter schools versus privatization of color people, because Alice Huffman, the person that they got to pass it, is a lobbyist for many things and has been a lobbyist for many things. And I document some of them in here. She was paid by landlords to fight rent control. She was paid by Philip Morris to fight any taxes or any community money to be given back by Big Tobacco, who was targeting Black communities. She was hired by the pharmaceutical industry to fight against, and paid $800,000 to fight against a cap on the prices of prescription drugs. As a matter of fact, in direct contrast to the bill that Bernie nationally was pushing for California, she got paid and the NAACP to fight against it. I also want to point out that the same NAACP gets paid millions by telecom companies and other corporations to fight policies that are good for Black people, the Black community, all the time. And they all happen in exactly this type of way, going through a fast track through a system. It's a long story that I'm telling here. I only want to tell it because
it's important.
We buy a simple story so often. And this is why when you encounter people and you're talking about school choice, Black schools, schools outside of the system, wanting to have charter schools and all of this, the first thing that white folks do is throw in your face, well, I stand with the NAACP, because they feel like that's a Black license to discount what you have to say, right, as a Black person. And that's exactly why they purchased that license from the NAACP, so that they could forever, this group of people, Diane Ravitch and Anthony Cody and all of these folks. Here, listen, let's look at this. Diane Ravitch sent her kids to private school, obviously is not against school choice. Leonie Hampson, big advocate in New York, sent her kids to private school, but she's an advocate of public schools. Let's keep going down the line. Mariachi, we did some digging. We couldn't find out, but what we found out, we thought was she was a supporter of private schools at one point. But these two dudes, Uhura Williams, Julian Vasquez, both private school graduates who have grown up now to be against school choice. Can't keep buying. When I talk about Afroplastics in academia, this dude is at the University of St. Thomas here in Minnesota. This dude is the dean of education in Kentucky, right? And they are symbolic of an entire class of people who benefited from a system that they now fight against, which is choice, right? Like this dude's Black dad who was a Black professor, put him in a private school, right, as his best way out. Same thing here. This dude got a scholarship to play football for a white private school. Anyway, sorry about the long story, Sharif.
No.
But I'm trying to connect history to today.
Listen, the hypocrisy in the liberal field of education is real, and I think just that idea. Deborah Watkins said this is not the intent of the moratorium. Ms. Watkins, Mama Watkins, you're going to have to explain more, because, I went to one of the NAACP conventions.
I did too.
That was held in Baltimore. And man, it was a sad sight. It was a sad sight to see this, building full of Black people who could actually make a statement to champion Black children, and they weren't. Mm-hmm. And they weren't. That's not what they were there for. That's not what they were doing. And so it was really a sight for me to see, because I've been to many conventions, but most of my time is spent in, that Black radical convention, growing up and seeing how they talk about Black children, independent Black schools, Black educators who were conscious. And I saw other folks who were, sipping tea, high heels, and really just, talking nonsense. A lot of it was nonsense.
Well, having bedazzled hats and shit, just like loving it. Many of them that traveled the country doing hearings on charter schools. One of them actually ran a charter school. Several others were grandparents of charter school enrollees. And they just saw no problem with the irony of like what they were pushing. I followed the NAACP. I think they did 7 of those. I went to almost every single one in different cities, the hearings that they did on them. They were so not part of grassroots activity. They were not democratic. They weren't really trying to hear from grassroots people. The one that they had in New Orleans ended with the Black masses screaming at them that they had never done anything for the Black community. They don't even return phone calls or email, right? And they're all sitting up there well-dressed and shit, talking about we're with you. And the actual community was savaging them in that room. Not even because they were pro-charter, because they weren't, just because they were basically sending them a message, you have never represented us, right? That's the difference between the Black bourgeoisie and the Black masses.
Let me tell you a quick personal story. So, when I was a principal, I was there at a charter school for 11 years. Prior to that, I was in the district for 15 years. But when it was time for renewal, every 5 years you get your renewal. So there were students were very conscious. So a lot of charter school leaders, they don't tell their children and their families about all of this stuff. I was always very clear, very frank about like, hey, this is what's happening. This is what they're going to do. Yes, they have the authority to, to close you down or allow you to continue to operate. Our students wanted to go. And I was like, this is all part of your education. So, we went. But when you get to the school board, they lock the door. You can't come in until they say it's time. So we arrive, and unbeknownst to us, there was a anti rally. Like, we were one of the schools that was, to be reauthorized. We arrive, get off the buses, and there's a crowd of folks, most of them white folks in red shirts, protesting that we get reauthorized, and the children like, wait, they talking about our school? I was like, listen, let's hear what they're saying. So the children end up doing an anti-rally, against their rally. But when they looked, they were like, who's that guy? Because there was a black man.
Right. I remember this guy.
There's a black man who was helping to rally, Royal Up. And our children, they West Philly, they shut it down. Like, they protested like it was, the Black radical tradition would have been very proud of how they rallied around the support of their own school and community. And so much so the police came over and said, El-Mekkia, you have to get the children to stop chanting. Y'all don't have a permit to protest.
Oh, Lord,
I was like, we're not actually here to, first of all, I'm not telling them to be quiet. This is their voice, this is their school, and they're hearing something, they're responding to it, Secondly, we're not here to protest. We're actually here to support, the school. Some of them were, folks were testifying on behalf of the school, which, ended up being reauthorized. But the door is locked. We can't go in, so we are out here. So you're telling me to tell all these kids just to be quiet? I'm not doing that. But they were like, the guy they were pointing to was the head of the local NAACP.
Wow.
So this black man is out there with them rallying and talking all this smack. And one of the kids like, he's never even been to our school. I was like, you know what? Let's invite him to come. He did, to his credit, he did end up coming. And, behind closed doors, how they talk about schools, and in front of white folks, how they talk about charter schools is very, very different.
Well, I mean, there's a difference between, listen, I don't think that black people are out here like stomping for charter schools, period. They're just stomping for whatever it is that they want. Their right to have access to something. It's not just charter schools writ large, like everyone is good, any more than every magnet school is something that they're stomping for. But when you open a school choice program, I said this week in another show, when you open a school choice program or a charter school, you often get a backlog of interest. You get like waiting lists in many cases. That has to tell you about what people want. So if you are a leader out here fighting against what people want, and you're trying to go upstream and to cut off the thing that they want so that it never gets to them, that is not you working on behalf of your people. That is you thinking you know better as this really educated person who, by the way, is putting your own kids in private schools or magnet schools. Like, we looked at the schools, we research people or charters. We researched this NAACP leadership to find out where many of them were sending their own kids. And it's not pretty, right? Like, they were doing the opposite of what they were preaching for everybody else. Like, for their own kids, they were trying to get them into the safe harbor of great schools. For everybody else's, it was them trying to keep us in the buildings that they wanted. Deborah Watkins says that she wants to teach us. So Deborah Watkins and I are going to be talking to each other because she had some great things to say in multiple previous shows. And I was fortunate enough to get an invitation, an introduction to her from Zakia, who seems to know everybody. Zakia is like one of my colleagues who works with me, who is really well connected to real people. I have to point that out. Like, she's really connected to real people, which I respect. So I'm going to love my conversation with Deborah Watkins. She says California has the largest number of charter schools in the country. Y'all need to stop pretending that charter schools are the panacea for black people. No one ever said that they're the panacea for black people. Not. Yeah, what we are saying is you can't build black schools if you have black people fighting against you all the time to build black schools. And we do think that black schools are as damn close to getting a panacea as you want, right? So the license to be able to start, run, and operate a school, if you attack that, my ability to get a license to run schools and operate schools that uplift my own community, regardless of what other people do with that same license, right? Because, give a driver's license to people doesn't mean they're going to be good drivers, but I don't want you taking driver's license away from everybody because I got places to go, right? I got things to do, right? So don't tell me because there's some other bad drivers that I shouldn't have a driver's license. That's what I feel about charters. Like, don't tell me I can't have a charter to start my schools because you're afraid of what some other people are going to do with their license to drive a school. But I want to talk to her and others about it because we are still having this argument in our community about these things. Any final words, bruh? Anything that you want to, as we wrap this out, man, this is getting more and more rich every week. I do, when you give your final word, I am going to play a short clip that I think is hella provocative. Provocative. This show is about the Black bourgeoisie, and I'm about to play some fire that I don't think y'all are ready for. You're not even going to catch all of it. I'm going to have to send you the link so you can watch it again 2 or 3 times. So I'm going to play it after Sharif's last words. So Sharif, how do we wrap this all up? You're an educator. How do we wrap up today's lesson?
Well, I'm going to just really read 3 quotes that I think are very instructive. But first, if you can, make sure you get this book, Up South, Matthew Countryman. It is very informative about some of the things that we are struggling and grappling with. It's captured very well, documented. That and Black history, Black education in the South are 2 such richly, we talk about them a lot. We refer to them a lot. One, Dr. King, just remember Dr. King, we're talking about Black people in this context because this is Freedom Friday and we're talking about Black folks. And I think it's instructive to remember that Dr. Martin Luther King said that bourgeoisie, white, Black, and brown behave about the same worldwide. Right. And so understanding that it is a mindset of how a small group of elite are trained to think about the rest of their people. And instead of opening the doors wider, they want that they lose their elitism. And so the idea is, let me get through that crack and hold the crack, maybe even make it even smaller, because I'm more powerful as a singular token Black than having 10 more, 9 more. Right, because some of them may bring some radical ideas and really be talking about freedom and messing up my position in white supremacy. The other one is, and I promised this quote, before we end it. So Carter G. Woodson, I think, is very important for, and this is something that should be put up on people's walls, and understood and internalized, and we should use it as a prism, how we act on behalf or against our people. Dr. Carter G. Woodson says, in The Miseducation of the Negro, which continues to this day, in action, in thought, in policies, in politics, if you can control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his action. When you determine what a man shall think, you do not have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you make a man feel he is inferior, you do not have to compel him to accept an inferior status, for he will seek it out himself. If you make a man think he is justly an outcast, you do not have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one.
Oof.
So if we have a person who thinks like that, but is still given a position of authority, they are some of the most dangerous people against our community that exist. And we need to be vigilant about that.
Man, you teaching. I appreciate that. I appreciate you. I appreciate all of our viewers, our listeners, the people who add rich discussion to our comments. Appreciate you all. I'm growing in doing this daily. This was something I just started doing. Did not know that it was going to be so rich for me to hear feedback from folks that made me go off and study things that made me a better person. So I appreciate all of you in the comments who watch, who come, who listen, who support. Please share it with friends. If you think that there are other people that could be brought into the conversation that are rich, please send me show ideas or pieces of information that you think we don't have. Sharif's Twitter handle is going across the bottom. So if you see it, he's at El-Mekkia on Twitter. You can find him. You can email me. You can either find me on Twitter at Citizen Stewart, which is the best and fastest way to get in touch with me. But you can also email me, Christopher@activist.com. What I want you to do is the first 3 people that send me an email today, I'm going to get you a copy of this seminal book, if you don't have it already, The Black Bourgeoisie, which I think should be required reading for all of us. Some of it you can agree with, some of it you're not going to agree with. Some of it has changed over time, but it's a very important book. I want to give away 3 copies. So first 3 people, who email me will get a copy of that book. Hopefully in the future, if you read those books, any of these books we keep giving away because y'all killing me with these books. But any of these books that we give away, it would be great to have after you read them, to have you come back and let us have a discussion with you about these books. So I appreciate that. As we wrap, I promised you guys a provocative quote. This is Dr. Tommy Curry, who I'm working to get on the show, who's so much fire comes out of him that it's impossible. He's not one of the Afroplastics in academia. He's one of the real folks. I'm going to play a clip. I'm going to also give you the link to the clip. So if you can't hear it very well, please listen to it in your own private time. But we're going to go out with this. So Sharif, are you ready for the fire quote?
I'm holding on. I think I'm ready.
All right. Let's see. And I hope everybody can hear it. Well, I'm going to have to use my mic to actually make it happen. But here we go.
Today I want to talk about the Black bourgeois.
Let's do it.
All right. So, as academics, there's a tendency to see Black people as products of our ideological agendas rather than populations in the need of study. In other words, we see Black Americans as the pathologies we need them to be to pretend that our ideologies, be it socialism, radicalism, feminism, progressivism, etc., can solve their moral defects. Now, this isn't the first time that somebody's mentioned this. I mean, Sylvia Winters talks about this as a mistake in the map for the territory. E. Franklin Fraser talks about this in The Failure of the Negro Intellectual. Both of these thinkers were pointing to the dangers of the coming bourgeoisization of Black academics. And what Winters specifically saw as dangerous was the Marxist-Leninism and the Black feminism that happened in the 1960s and 70s as a weakening of the Black studies movement, which sought to both study Black folk as they really are and to energize their political creativity through the Black arts movement. Today, though, we have conference after conference, paper after paper talking about Black people. We're really talking about Black folks as problems. And Black people become those elevated and civilized individuals who are ready to receive the ideologies of Black academics. In reality, these scholars, mostly in the humanities, are arguing for more Black people to simply be like them. So you give papers, and people say, well, basically, they should be like me. They should be the Black radical, the Black feminist, the Black progressive, the Black pragmatist, just like I am, right? And, something really kind of stands out to me. Patricia Hill Collins made this criticism of Black feminists using intersectionality in the humanities, where she said that, and I think that her criticism is really generalizable to the whole of many Black academics, because she argued that what happens is we use our lived experience to justify the end product of our inquiry. So it's a circular type of thinking, where you adopt a set of premises as true before the inquiry ever starts, and then we find the same result at the end of the inquiry to Black folk. So when we talk about the bourgeoisization of Black scholars, I'm not simply trying to suggest that these scholars adopt white middle-class values. It's to suggest that they adopt white methodologies and ethics to interpret racism, sexism, and classism as the denial of access to white resources rather than the concrete phenomena of how Black people actually suffer from racism, sexism, and poverty. And these are very real phenomena for actual Black folk. Not for the Black academic who's trying to use this only as a way to get more alliances and more resources for white folk. But for real Black folk, these are the types of things, poverty, disease, etc., that lead to death.
So what say you? What say you, Brother Sharif?
Yeah, that was deep, and I'm going to have to listen to it again. But I think two things that really stood out to what he elevated is that, people's lived experiences informs their research. It surfaces biases, and I think we talk a lot about like how do you interrogate your own biases, and it also speaks to that individual who's saying, pull yourself up, ignoring the racism, ignoring the man-created poverty, right? The policies that create poverty, deep poverty. Ignore that and look at how I made it. And I think that's sinister on so many levels, right? And so I think, when if you don't have a deep love and connection to your people, you're going to be more prone to fall in that trap that Curry describes. Like I think that's the genesis of so much of it, man.
We need more Currys. We need more Dr. Currys. Dr. Curry, I'm trying to get him on the show because he wrote one of the most powerful things about Brown, and he basically rescued Dr. Derek Bell's work from the heap of other Black academics to say what it really said.
Mm-hmm.
So if we get them on, I'm going to share that with everybody. Again, thank you everybody for watching. Brother Sharif, thank you for coming on every week for this.
No,
this is
I look forward to it. I appreciate the interaction with the with all the listeners, and the comments are so just rich and conscious and challenging all at the same time. And it's not a space where everybody agrees. And so I appreciate Mama Watkins, pushing back and bringing additional, lenses and things like that. I think that is very, very important. I think we can disagree, and none of us are above criticism. None of our thoughts and ideas are above criticism. And we're all, conscious about who we're committed to, which is, the 8 million Black children, in this
every
system.
day.
Yeah.
8 million Black children walking into schools that aren't prepared for them and won't help them reach their highest potential. That's what I say all the time. I actually don't mind agreeing or disagreeing. That's not really my purpose. My purpose is to learn and to be an intelligent person. So I'm going to learn from Ms. Watkins as we talk further, and everybody else who is in this time. And whether we agree or disagree or whatnot, I'm going to learn from you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what this is all about. Let's wrap up. We're at 1:10. We will do this again next week. I don't know what we're going to talk about next Friday, but we had to do this show. So I'm going to field suggestions from other people listening today about what we should come back to next week.
That's a great idea.
Thank you all for watching. Really appreciate you.